Good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you here to ITC. My name is Rob Skidmore. I'm a section chief here, and part of my, the good part of my job, let's say, is overseeing our work in digital, both in e-commerce and digital entrepreneurship. So I think that's why I've been elected to moderate this session. I want to start off by welcoming our, and I'll introduce later, but to welcome our Honorable Minister from Netherlands, from Kenya. We have, of course, our Executive Director and the many distinguished guests that are here, ambassadors, delegates, colleagues. Thank you all for being here. So we know, pardon, comme ça? Ah, d'accord. Okay. Ah, for the video. I'm not used to being on video. So we know rapid digitalization has changed a lot of things for us. We all feel it in our lives. We feel it in our businesses as well. We feel it in the way we shop, the way we interact, the way we receive information, the way that we are trained, and so on. And we know, of course, that the pandemic has been a massive accelerator for this process. And we've seen in our business, we work with maybe 20 to 30,000 SMEs a year. We see in our business the massive opening this has made for them. Both an opportunity, so they can reach markets they wouldn't be able to. They can reach places they can't travel to. They can stay in business even during pandemic lockdowns, and so on. And the trust it's opened up among consumers. So people suddenly, who would never have shopped online, are willing to trust sellers. They're willing to make choices online that they wouldn't have made otherwise. And we believe not only that, not only does it provide resilience and opportunity, it has a chance and it has a big role in providing sustainable and inclusive development. And further, that e-commerce can be a source, can be an asset in reducing inequality. It can give women, it can give youth, it can give isolated communities the opportunity to reach markets and to be reached by technology. And I'll give you a few examples. We have isolated communities of women in Pakistan who we've been able to not only link to the internet through smartphones, but also to link to markets. And they've begun selling in a way that they wouldn't be able to do due to restrictions in mobility. And this goes for all different levels of sophistication and geographic spread. So we have also artisanal firms in Central America, for instance, that are reaching markets through platforms like Etsy and able to have much more value because they can have a direct relationship with customers. And we've all seen many examples of this. However, being in Geneva, we know positive outcomes are not automatic. And we know that there are many challenges to making this work in a way that's inclusive and a way that's coherent. So what we want to do with this event is give us a platform to discuss some of those challenges, the challenges SMEs face in reaching the digital economy, especially developing country SMEs. Second, we want to talk, since we're in Geneva, since it's MC12, we want to talk about trade rules. So we want to explore how digital trade rules can contribute to bridging the digital divide. And our work, we see some of these challenges and we see the potential for an agreement like the Joint Statement Initiative to address some of these issues like e-signatures, paperless trade, payment systems, also to protect consumers and to make and to do many things in terms of protection of personal data and trade facilitation. So there's a lot of potential there, but obviously a lot of work in order to realize it. So that's what we're trying to do here today with the event. We've got some great folks that will be talking to us today. So first of all, what are the practical challenges for SME participation in e-commerce? We're going to talk about that, and how can that these be addressed through the WTO negotiations? What are the key issues for developing and least developed countries in the JSI negotiations, for instance, and other areas? And how can technical assistance be most helpful, and a variety of other issues. So with that, let me invite our very distinguished panel to the podium here. The first, I'm going to invite Liesje Schrijnemacher, the Minister of Foreign Trade and Development Cooperation since 10 January 2022, so relatively new. Previously, as you remember, European Parliament, and I think you've got some great things to say, and the Netherlands has always been out front in terms of areas of digitalization, so please come and join us. Next, we have the Executive Director of the ITC, Pamela Cook-Hamilton. She has been executive director since 2020. Not an easy time to start, but has really positioned us and really asked us to raise our level of ambition on digital. Before that, she was working at the UNCTAD. She led the Caribbean Export Development Agency and had a bunch of positions with OAS and others. So she's got some really nice wide experience. Honorable Betty Maina is the Cabinet Secretary, Ministry of Industrialization, Trade, and Enterprise Development. She has 27 years experience in organizational leadership and development. She's been the Principal Secretary of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry, State Department for Industrialization, State Department for East African Affairs, and also as Chief Executive of the Kenya Association of Manufacturers for 11 years, so also private sector. So very nice combination there. And then online, normally we have Moulay Tabouret, who has founded the Anka platform in Côte d'Ivoire. Moulay, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here, and I can hear you perfectly.
Very good. Okay. After growing up in Mali and working all over the world for companies of all sizes, he has dedicated today his experience to the world of African-inspired creation. He's created this platform, Anka, which brings together distribution solutions, payment solutions, sales, marketing solutions, and it's taken off really incredibly. So we'll hear a little bit about that. So let me take a seat here with you. So, Mr. Schreinemaka, let me ask you, why is e-commerce receiving particular attention at this time? And just in terms of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, how do you support or aim to support the development of e-commerce? Yeah, hopefully you've got a mic.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Rob, for this question, and also thank you for everyone for being here, and to Pamela for your hospitality and cooperation, and of course all the work that you're doing for SMEs in developing and transitional economies. And welcome to my other distinguished co-speakers here and online. And thank you for joining us, everyone here and online, in discussing this current and important topic, because to answer your question, I first would like to talk a little bit about the challenges of the digital economy, then on the way forward and the current rules that you also mentioned. We are in Geneva, of course, and how the Netherlands tries to contribute to closing the digital divide. And there is, I believe, nothing better to start doing so by listening to you, experts and entrepreneurs. Because small and medium-sized enterprises are the drivers of our economies. So investing in critical areas that can help them become more productive and more sustainable is crucial, especially since the outbreak of COVID-19 has really accelerated the growth of digital services worldwide. And currently, education, work, and public services increasingly rely on digital access. And digital trade obviously has a lot of potential. It can boost innovation and it create jobs. And as was mentioned also in your introduction, Rob, tackle inequalities, and it can even help contribute to the achievement of the SDGs. The key challenge, however, is to make sure that digitalization and new technologies create value for all. Right now, that is not the case. And according to the UN, almost half of the world's population has little, if any, access to the internet. I think that's a number that, if you let it sink in, is quite worrying and disturbing. And in a world where economic developments become more dependent on digital technologies, a deepening digital divide impedes human development. That's why we need to pursue digital policies that empower people and businesses. And we need to create a human-centered, sustainable, and more prosperous digital future. We need policies that focus on acquisition of digital skills and adequate regulatory frameworks, why we are here also in Geneva. And international trade rules play a key role in tackling these challenges and bridging the digital divide. Citizens and consumers everywhere need to have trust in online markets, because without trust, digital development will not happen. And that's where the joint statement initiative on e-commerce comes in. And good progress is being made. Agreement has already been reached on rules concerning the legal effect of electronic contracts and electronic signatures, which is obviously a vital condition for digital trade. Unfortunately, the sad reality of Russia's brutal aggression against Ukraine has slowed down the process. And we welcome solutions found to be able to continue with limited negotiations without Russia. It is important that the ongoing negotiations on other relevant topics like data flows, privacy, consumer protection proceed as well. And by ensuring market access, we aim to create new opportunities for digital entrepreneurs. And by unlocking the economic potential of small businesses outside of traditional flows of goods and services. By giving them easier and cheaper access to untapped markets, by making sure that they can sell their products or digital services through e-commerce. This especially holds promise for SMEs and women. According to a 2021 International Finance Corporation report, closing gender gaps by 2025 could add nearly $15 billion to the value of the e-commerce market in Africa by 2030. That's a strong business case in itself for facilitating women's engagement in digital trade. And the Netherlands invests in inclusive digitalization through capacity building and technical assistance. And through the Netherlands Trust Fund, Phase 5 program, for instance. And this ITC program helps SMEs in digital technologies and agribusiness to become more competitive, so they can be successful when they enter regional and international markets. And then they can generate revenue, attract foreign investments, and create jobs. So in the end, they can have a sustainable impact on the entire ecosystem. And that's more important than ever now that we're in the middle of a climate and biodiversity crisis that impacts the most vulnerable first. Another example is the UN UNCTAD E-Trade for Women initiative, an initiative that aims to inspire tech women around the world and support them in capacity building and networking. Needless to say, much more can and must be done if we want to leave no one behind. So I'm looking to hear for more ideas, and I'm hoping to hear some today. Please let us know how you think that we can reduce the digital divide and what Netherlands and other countries can do in order to make sure that everyone can take full advantage of the ongoing digital transformation and to truly ensure a vibrant and brighter future for all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks indeed. It's also a good time for me to mention that the event's jointly organized also with the Mission of the Netherlands here. So thanks to Diederik and everybody at the Mission and to Ambassador Beckers. So I want to turn now to you, Pamela, if I may. Do you have a mic? You do? Okay, very good.
Yes, I think so.
Why is e-commerce so important to SMEs? We kind of are assuming that a little bit, so you can give us a little bit more on that. And how are discussions currently taking place relevant to developing countries?
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for this opportunity, and thank you, Minister Schrijnemacher, right? Yeah. Schrijnemacher. Make sure that I get it right. I feel like I'm on The Voice, The Voice when it's been around. I was wondering what I always saw these red chairs outside. I never knew what they were for. So now I know. Thank you, Rob. But anyway, let me just say, first of all, that, digital engagement has gone on steroids in the last 2 years, and I think we know this. It has simply completely obliterated what we thought was going to be the reality of digital trade. COVID has completely transformed what digital trade means and also its capacity to help. Internet traffic jumped globally by 50% in the last 2 years. And I think that says more than anything what this has meant for international trade. And various studies also show that in the adoption of e-commerce equivalent to between 3 and 10 years of growth. So essentially, it multiplied much more than would have been expected prior to COVID. In addition to which, UNCTAD, I think I saw UNCTAD come in here somewhere. Hi, is that you? I think, yes, I see her at the back there. UNCTAD's latest estimates puts e-commerce at a value of $26.7 trillion, which is an enormously large number and equates to 1/3 of global GDP. And that in and itself says everything. But, unfortunately, this is not the reality across the world. There's a huge divide and this is true for some countries, but in Africa, for example, the actual entire activity of the continent is only 10% of Amazon, 10% of one company, which tells us also another story. And it's a story I think we need to pay attention to and to note and to look at how we can, and I think that's why Minister Mena is here, to tell us how we can actually tackle that very real problem. So these mixed results show us that there is indeed an incredible digital divide, and that separates those who are going to be able to make the leap and those who are not. And if we are going to enable developing countries to do what needs to be done in this new digital economy, we have to empower them and we have to give them the opportunity to get access and to be connected. And that is the issue of connectivity that we want to address. So affordable access as well as accessible digital connectivity is a prerequisite for e-commerce to reach its potential, particularly to help what we call the other half that you referred to, the 4 billion who remain unconnected in a world that is now driven by connectivity. So of all the important uses of increased connectivity, such as better access to education and healthcare, the greatest potential for growth and economic productivity is online trade. And I think we can't underestimate how important that is going to be moving forward. So offering small enterprises and individual entrepreneurs the means to be able to connect and trade with one another is going to be not only smart for the development perspective, but also smart economically. And that's why we've actually launched a new digital trade engagement and placed it at the heart of our strategic plan, which Rob is in charge of, called Switch On. And it essentially is one that has implications right across ITC. It's important for us to be able to advise on appropriate policy and also providing related thought leadership to working with institutions and empowering entrepreneurs in their journey toward better and more inclusive adoption of the digital trade. I also wanted to make a point about why it is important for MSMEs to be engaged. I placed it in context, but why is it important? And I think, it's always important to answer the question asked. So instead of saying what I'm supposed to say on this paper, I'll tell you what I think. Why is it important? The first thing is that e-commerce is the new trading paradigm. It's simply it. It's 1/3 of global GDP. Now, in 10 years, it probably will be 2/3 of global GDP. Digital services are the only set of services and trade that did not fall during the pandemic. And so, therefore, its resilience and its ability to be cross-cutting and survive is something that we should pay attention to. And so, kind of like, people like to say, well, we don't all have to go digital. We'll just all go along. But it's kind of like getting LPs when you could get iTunes. Who's playing LPs anymore except a few diehards like Sasha? But other than that, I think most people are downloading, and so we have to move. We have to move with the times, and that's important. The second issue is it removes the limitations of geography and physical space. For a small entrepreneur to be able to sell anywhere in the world from their living room is an incredible revolution. Most of us, I'm from a small island developing state. We have no neighbors. And if we need to see anybody, we have to go on the sea to get to them. So the only way that we can actually access in real terms is through the internet. And so it revolutionizes our ability to actually engage in international trade in a real way. The third is that it's a vehicle to facilitate real access as opposed to theoretical access. And let me explain what I mean by that. One of the fundamental problems that we have had with international trade agreements for the last 50 years, and I've been part of them for 30 years. I told her I could be her mom. But the truth is, we have not gotten access. I shouldn't say that. We've gotten access, we've just not gotten real access. How many of these trade agreements have actually translated into market penetration? How many of them have actually enabled real access as opposed to theoretical access? The internet, e-commerce will enable that. And it creates a whole platform for us to be able to enable developing countries to take advantage of that. The other thing it does is it opens the door to international trade. It removes barriers that are linked directly to physical presence. And that is also a powerful thing. Because if you don't have to spend on overheads, if you don't have to be somewhere in order to offer a product, it removes the cost associated with that, and it enables you to be more cost effective and also more profitable. So what can we do as ITC for developing countries? Because I think that is another issue, and it comes to the issue of the JSI. Now the JSI, we have asked countries for, we have encouraged countries to engage in the JSI on e-commerce. Why? Because I always believe it's better to be at the table, to be in the game. As someone once told me very early in my career, never take yourself out of the game. Because if you're out of the game, you can't win. So always show up, even if they don't want you, and, and always play the game. And so I think it's important because it is already setting the rules for e-commerce in the future. And it is creating a paradigm shift that developing countries need to be a part of. It does not mean that we're encouraging countries to simply forego their own development objectives and priorities. But it does mean that if you're at the table, you can influence what emerges from these agreements. And so that is our approach when it comes to digital engagement and access in the context of the e-commerce negotiations. But in addition to which, what we would like to do, and it's something that I spoke about when I first started talking about the JSI initiative, we have to be able to assist countries in the negotiating process. Because I think it's a fallacy to ask countries to enter negotiations without the requisite skill sets and empowerment to do so. In a way, you're almost setting them up. And I think it's important that we also work at that level, that we work at the policy level, that we work at the skills level. And then we also work with the small entrepreneurs on the ground, the MSMEs, so that they can actually upscale their ability to utilize e-commerce for their engagement with international trade. Market intelligence is going to be important as part of that. Understanding what standards will be required, looking at digital currency as well. What's that going to mean? I think Jamaica just adjusted its Central Banking Act to allow digital currency. So it's a completely new world, and our MSMEs have to become aware of that. And finally, you know, how do we actually help them engage in this process in a positive, constructive way that actually defends their interests and promotes international trade, and in the final analysis leads to long-term economic development and equality. Oh, thank you.
Thanks very much. Secretary Amaya, do you have a microphone as well? Great, okay. Should be working. Yeah. So I think it's a good time for you to come in. And so the question I have for you is, what importance does Kenya place on e-commerce? And what are you doing to help Kenyan SMEs succeed?
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank both ITC and the Netherlands for convening this session. I always like the way when you go to these international meetings, you can spend a lot of time outside the auditorium in many other activities, which is exactly what I've done. But we consider this subject critical and an important subject because we are all very aware of the transformative effects of technology and digital innovation. And the last 2 years, even if we didn't know, now we know. I think those days it was a preserve of a few, but I think when everybody had to embrace it, when everybody couldn't get food unless it was ordered online and delivered at your doorstep, then suddenly it became something that you can really live with. And I was actually quite surprised by how ready we were. We weren't certain before, but in absolutely no time, even little people or small traders in the market will be able to send you vegetables if you need it. They just have to put it on the back of a motorbike and you get it home and you pay for it by M-Pesa. So that's been very, very helpful. And I think as we continue to bounce back from this pandemic, we cannot wish away e-commerce, and we need to utilize it better for all, not just, I mean, I guess we think about for it in terms of trade, but we're also able to use it in terms of access to government services, in terms of access to goods, in terms of access even to transport and logistics. That can easily, you're used to paying for your, I mean, airplane ticket but with a credit card, but right now it's possible to pay for an airplane ticket in Kenya using mobile money and other such services. So there's a lot of innovation in that space. The best way for governments to do this is to ensure that you have the right policy frameworks and support frameworks for it. The Kenyan example it's helpful because we already had a history with especially mobile money. So now we are catching up with more policies and strategies to support e-commerce. With the support of UNCTAD, we've just completed an e-commerce readiness assessment of Kenya, and one of the things that came out of the assessment is the fact that it needs to, government policy needs to catch up a little bit better. We have a digital strategy, but we need to now buttress all of this with a comprehensive strategic framework so that we're not always playing catch up as government. I don't think we'll ever catch up with the private sector, but it's important that we do have the policy frameworks for it. It's been extremely helpful for SMEs. Pamela has just mentioned what it has done to be able to access markets for many, many SMEs, and therefore supporting them in taking advantage of e-commerce is going to be very helpful. And one of the ways that we need to ensure that we can support it is also with regard to payment systems. Because we tend, I mean, part of a lot of our SMEs will only sell to the people that they can have an exchange with. We've had lots of examples where you send your money and the product that comes is not exactly what you paid. So in order to build trust, then we have somebody says, no, you pay upon delivery. And upon delivery, there are enough incidences of somebody just shutting the door on the delivery guy before paying, and you don't have, so it's navigating the space that would enable a lot of trade with strangers, which would be very, very helpful. The second thing is to also build the skills and capability in this regard. We've invested a lot in our digital skills, but you need more and more as we see wider adaptation of e-commerce. We need the infrastructure for it. So you need the entire ecosystem, which is what we hope to capture in the more comprehensive strategy. In our estimation, more than 50% of Kenyan firms are engaged in online trade. So this becomes a matter that needs to be resolved with a lot of urgency. Kenya has joined and supported the JSI on e-commerce. We haven't participated as much, partly because of the capacity, perhaps, of the mission and capacity from headquarters. But it is urgent that whenever decisions are being made, when rules are being made, that all are at the table. This matter is really being driven a lot by the developed countries, by companies. But it's important that all players are on the table. One of the sticky questions that we'll be discussing and making a decision in this ministerial conference is on how governments also get a piece of the pie. Now, when it's easy to, if governments make money from tariffs on goods and services that they can identify. Before you enter the border into the European Union, you must pay the necessary duties. But what is the border for digital, for e-commerce? And how do governments get a piece of the pie? And if a lot more business shifts to the internet and to the digital space, this is an important question. I'm sure the world has got enough bright people and economists who can calculate tax incidents for content on the digital space. And therefore, for many countries such as ourselves, I know we're a bit conflicted in it, but I think the position of a lot of developing countries is that we cannot postpone the conversation on digital tax forever. Just because we don't have the capacity at present does not mean that it can be postponed, because the longer we postpone it, the message that is being sent to the developing countries that you can join us, but you can't benefit from these processes. So I think we do need to take the concerns that are being expressed by the proponents that are not necessarily in favor of endless extension of the moratorium to have a defined time frame from when we can conclude a conversation on taxation for digital commerce. I thank you.
Thanks very much. And so I think we're building towards now our conversation with Moulay Tabouret, who I hope is online with us from Côte d'Ivoire. Moulay, are you with us?
Yes, I am. Yes, I am here.
Yes, great to have you. So maybe you can react a little bit to what you've heard, but also I think we want to hear what your experience has been of how e-commerce has brought big opportunities to small companies. That's kind of the title of the session. But how has that worked in your experience?
Pretty well. I think I can echo a lot of the dreams and a lot of the numbers that have been shared until now. Our company, for example, Anka, indeed was among the ones that accelerated dramatically during COVID. So our revenue multiplied by 3 and our volume by 5 in 1 year, allowing us to cross the threshold of over $50 million of transaction in 175 countries all over the world. And the sellers doing that growth and doing that expansion are 80% women based in 46 African countries. So pretty much all over Africa, we've seen this growth. And we have seen, like you mentioned, women, small businesses benefit from the growth of the digital use. And what is even more interesting is at the beginning of the presentation, you mentioned Etsy, is that we realize that now this growth is on multiple sales channels. And that's the vision that I think on a digital, I might say, growth plan, the emerging countries can make a difference. Is that we don't necessarily have, just like M-Pesa was kind of an acceleration of the finance and the mobile money process and payment globally, I believe we can do the same thing with commerce, because now commerce is not happening only on marketplaces. We have one called Africa.com that is the biggest marketplaces for all things made of Africa. But we also allow sellers to sell everywhere else. We allow them to sell on WhatsApp. That's where they are most naturally, often with their customers all over the world. But they also get customers coming on Instagram, on TikTok, and everywhere else. So I think the only thing I can add, and I think it's quite interesting, is that to actually have people from all over developing countries join, we need to make sure that the solution we build are naturally I might say, ingrained into their use of the digital platforms. It cannot be just people joining platforms and having to learn new things. It's also at some point us making sure that on the natural places they trade, they have the tools to like Ms. Mina I mentioned, to pay, to ship, to transact with trust, because I know we mentioned that, but ultimately it is the baseline of all trade.
Thanks a lot. So we're coming slowly to the end here, but I wanted to ask you, and then I'm going to bring it back to our guests here. What do you think Geneva can do for you, or what do you think that, how can we facilitate this from, let's say, from here and from the work that we're doing at our different levels?
That's a good question. From what I've seen already, all over the countries in Africa I've been to, I've heard about ITC. So that's the good news I can give to Ms. Cook-Davis, is that from the ground up, we have heard about entrepreneurs that have been coached one way or the other, or met or encountered the knowledge shared by ITC. So for us, the idea is to kind of not reinvent the wheel. We are innovators, but innovators learn to adapt first. And from what I've seen, what we can do is keep collaborating. I think a lot of the networks, a lot of the contacts have already been set by ITC, and we can try to the best of our ability to provide new content. I know Ms. Cook-Davis mentioned knowledge. For example, in a few months, we are going to put out a white paper report based on the data on the ground that we saw on transaction in Africa and how people evolved, and how you can get a 17-year-old young guy that was struggling to find a job to build a company with his mom and now employ 30 people in Ivory Coast. And all of these stories, I think, can be catalyzed by ITC's reach and ITC's network to actually inspire not only more people to act, but also give them direct access to all the tools we're building. So for me, it's all about collaboration in different shapes and forms.
Also, not just ITC, obviously, but also the JSI and all the colleagues in the room and here.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that, Mulai. Maybe I want to bring it back to us here. When you hear the experience that he has, Minister Skrinamaka, what's your reaction, and how do you think that can help inform the information you were talking about and the work that we're doing jointly?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that he mentioned something very important, and that is learning from the SMEs themselves and what they need, and the lessons learned from already successful initiatives, successful programs. And I think what we can do here then in Geneva is making sure that we take these lessons and providing for a framework that work for these SMEs. So not top down, but really bottom up. So if I'm talking about the e-commerce agreements that have already been made, such as electronic contract or electronic signatures, I think these are very practical things that you can implement very quickly. And so I think by learning from the SMEs and really taking these lessons into account when we are negotiating is something very important. So listening to the people and businesses that actually need the rules, because that also increases trust. And as I said before, trust is really what you need when it comes to digital development.
So Pam, he mentioned some nice things about ITC, but I guess it's also, we're doing things very much in partnership, and it's kind of a massive multilateral solution that we're looking for. So how can we kind of work together to address some of the things that he mentioned?
Sure. Thanks, Rob. I think definitely collaboration and partnership is going to be critical. We can't reach everybody, and we can't do it in the ways that we play to our strengths. And so there's UNCTAD, there's WTO, there are several players across the room. There are the countries, there are the delegations. And I think if we can pull together collaboratively, first of all, to increase the access points. And it starts from Geneva, in the sense that, as I said before, if they're not at the table, you can't make the rules. And so I think one of the most important things is to democratize the access to the actual process, and to ensure that delegations from all countries, especially those who are going to be most impacted, are given the capacity to actually engage in a fulsome way and to express the issues that are of concern to them and to address the real obstacles to this. The second thing I would say is that, you know, the SMEs have shown basically what e-commerce has done in terms of democratizing access. It's been, for me, the most powerful lesson, that everybody now has a chance. And it doesn't matter where in the world you're located. If you have access, you have an opportunity. And so we have to ensure that we give everyone that opportunity. And then thirdly, just to ensure that we are listening, because sometimes we think we have all the answers. Geneva is very famous for that. You know, we know everything. But that we listen and that we actually hear what our constituents are saying and what they actually need rather than what we think they need. And so that we can actually be relevant and responsive to the real needs out there. So thanks.
Secretary Money, let me give the last word to you. How can, in a way, Geneva, you were talking about setting the right rules, the right framework. How do you think Geneva can help you in that process?
I think Pamela has touched on that, because if people don't know your needs, then it's very hard to make rules around your needs. But at the same time, just because they know your needs doesn't mean that they will still. Yeah, you just have to be there. You have to be pushy. You have to be stubborn. You have to be rude. You have to be everything. And yeah, whatever. Yeah, but we do need to be aware of that. Two, yeah, so just making sure that whatever rules we make take cognizance of the different circumstances of different players. What I find, however, is that people are not particularly generous, even if they know what your needs are. It's not, everybody makes, we're all inherently selfish. So we'll make rules only from our own perspective. So there'll always be this creeping and growing inequality. And Geneva needs to be conscious of that all the time. Some of he's mentioned it, and I also mentioned it, the question about security and really enabling trade and work between strangers is, for me, is an urgent. Otherwise, a lot of these SMEs are never really going to grow beyond if you can't, first of all, in terms of just scale and capacity to meet. If I put my little wicker baskets online, somebody requires very many. And the capacity to source from many producers, the same quality, transport it to whoever requires it in different places. It's really quite a bit of a challenge. So we need a medium for not only just enabling scale, but enabling scale of trade amongst many, many strangers. We sell our tea and milk perhaps out of a cooperative in a little geographical location, but the capacity to crowdsource from various players and supply to different consumers and still get it at their doorstep requires a lot of logistical interventions, which e-commerce will need to navigate that space, and we need to think about it in order to deliver for SMEs. Otherwise, large corporations will just occupy this space once again, and the cynicism that attends a lot of our conversations in spaces such as WTO is that we're just providing space for multinationals. But we need to find a way of, even if it is through collective vehicles, supporting a lot of SMEs to reach these larger markets in as rich a way as possible. Thank you.
Fantastic. I think we're coming to the end of our time. I want to thank again Netherlands for their support to our work and also for co-hosting this event, to the three of you, and also to Malaya Online for your insights, for everybody for being here. Nice to see folks in person. We're getting used to that again. People are reprinting their business cards. And I think for those of you who can stay, I believe somebody should shake their head vigorously if not, but I believe we have coffee and something to eat just here outside the conference room. Thanks again. Thanks a lot for coming, for supporting. Sorry, I forgot to mention the co-hosting at the beginning. Anything happening in the negotiations? Hopefully, at least it's polite.